Hi, hello, good evening, friends. Warm welcome, one and all, to the first edition of Nifty Banker, India's first retail Bank Nifty Traders online conference. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am Ashok Devanampriya. I am the host of this program today, and I sincerely thank every one of you for being a part of this new venture or a new thought process. And we promise you that you will carry a lot of learning, lot of memories post 16 days of extensive interaction with some of the best speakers lined up from our country. Well, friends, Traders Gurukul has been offering different themes of conferences on a quarter on quarter basis. In fact, we started with Super 25, followed by Option Omega, and then we did Intrazone, and now we are driving Bank Nifty. So this whole 16 days conference would be revolving only about Bank Nifty and its related topics. All right. So let's kick off with the first day of the show. We have an interesting speaker, Mr. Rohit Srivastava. It is a great honor to have this man as a part of our speaker community, one of the senior most trader in our network of speakers. He is the founder of IndiaCharts.com, and he's an industry veteran who has been in the market since 1990. Friends, it's since 1990. That's more or less a cool 30 years. I'm sure many of you have not even touched that age. So he is an expert in Elliott wave analysis. He spends significant time in analyzing markets with respect to behaviors, the cycles across individual stocks and economy. Let's hear from this man. And he also has close to 18 years of experience with ShareCon as a market analyst. So there's a lot of things to learn from Rohit sir today. Sir, on behalf of the entire participants of Nifty Banker and my Traders Gurukul community, I would welcome you into this program, and the stage is yours.
Thanks a lot, Ashok. Extremely happy and grateful to be here to address the members who've joined us today. And the topic, I think, comes in the heat of the moments that were there, I think, 6 months ago, where people were actually questioning whether the Indian banking sector would even survive or not. And this was despite the recovery that we saw in Nifty. So I think a very interesting theme to really discuss. And I think a lot of opinions in this time period have changed, including mine to some degree. And I'll go over them and what we are really thinking and the charts we are really looking at 5 months ago and trying to envision what might actually happen at a sector level. But too much has changed and is giving a very, very different picture. The first thing we did just now is to look at what the public perception is, and we can clearly see 88% polling that we did right at the beginning showing that everyone thinks 2021 the bank index is going to be a leader and not a laggard. It's very interesting, and we'll see if that turns out to be the case and what is the case for it to happen as well. So I'm going to look at levels, give you the big picture on Nifty, Bank Nifty, that is. We'll also go over the Nifty and the long-term cycles to put everything in perspective. But of course, the view on Bank Nifty and its status today will remain central. So thanks, Ashok, and let me start off into this. So that's the big question, leader or laggard for 2021. And what really happened, and I think the reason why a lot of negativity developed at the start of this year towards the banking sector is that we've actually seen the sector underperform in two major economies, and that is the US and Europe, over the entire last decade. And partly this happened because the entire burden of the economies was actually pushed onto the banking sector. So if you look at it, when you understand the credit cycle, something I'll come to a little later, is that our entire business cycle is driven by the expansion and contraction of credit. And when you reach extremely late stages of that, the burden has to be borne either by the corporate sector, it has to be borne by the government. I mean, there are only two people who are going to borrow and lend. So that's where the credit expansion happens. And in late stages of this cycle, we have seen a lot of expansion on the corporate side. And so as the corporate side has continued to take that burden, which means they're borrowing from the banks, as and when you've had a recession, whether it was 2000 or 2008, the banks took the losses, their books got written down, and therefore many of them could not really emerge from that breakdown, even though the credit cycle appears to have resumed, mostly because the governments are borrowing more, spending more. Corporates are doing it to some degree, but the balance sheets of the banks didn't really repair to that degree because the losses were far bigger than whatever gains they've made through the improvements in the business cycle themselves. So in short, what I say is the entire burden of those negative events, the weakness in the economy is actually ending up being borne by the banks themselves. And in India, that was partly a risk because you heard about the moratorium, and some people still see it as a risk that once we end these moratoriums, how much of the losses from the slowdown will have to be borne by these banks, and they'll actually announce, NPAs and so on. I think it will get dealt in some ways, my sense, especially with the government allowing certain type of write-offs or recognition for those losses. And if the RBI, makes some changes to the rules in terms of how you recognize it, it might not have the same kind of impact that people are envisioning. And on the other hand, it was a risk also because our NBFC sector, there was somebody who's already asked a question about how the NBFCs will do, went through a lot of turmoil because of this. And if I study the credit cycle in India, post 2002, most of the expansion in credit actually happened on the corporate side. So if I just look at the debt to GDP ratio, and I segregate it into two separate segments, which is the government debt to GDP and the corporate debt to GDP. The government debt to GDP in the year 2002 under Vajpayee was at almost 90%. And 3 years back or 4 years back, it had come down to almost 62%. So that's a big decline. And that's because every year all you've heard from the government is we need to bring down our fiscal deficit, need to bring down our fiscal deficit, need to bring down. And they've talked that talk for the last 2 decades and actually brought down the debt to GDP. Even though we say we have a fiscal deficit, our debt to GDP has come down, which is simply because GDP growth was much higher. But now through the pandemic and in the post-pandemic world, you will see that number actually expand because the government is now going into a spending spree, which is exactly what they should be doing. But in the meantime, what ended up happening is the corporate sector, which had its debt to GDP for the corporate sector, which is a combination of bank loans to other loans, moved up from 30% all the way to almost 65-70%. Okay, and that I'm including NBFCs and other forms of credit as well, which don't usually get reported. If you take account for everything, then the number is slightly higher than what you might read anywhere else. And so the Indian corporate sector was actually bearing the burden of growth through this phase. And when you went through a slowdown in some of these sectors, which everybody knows of now, which is power and the industrials, and all the big projects in infrastructure that got stuck, then you ended up with a lot of NPAs, and a large part of the banking sector had to take a toll because of that. And we all know the story now. But I was writing about this story way back in 2010-11, and most took it to be like a perma bear kind of story, but it actually played out, and the individual stocks and companies in those sectors took a hit. And which is why you'd think that the entire burden. So first, the burden was being borne by the bank because of that slowdown, then because of the NBFC fiasco, and then the pandemic. And so that would lead to the banking sector, not being able to come out of the blues and underperforming. Okay. So will Indian banks fall prey to the same phenomena? That's the question I asked. And when we say the same phenomena, this is a chart I drew up, I think sometime in August, when we were still looking at Nifty going higher, but we are still wondering whether the bank index will actually perform, because the bank Nifty relative to the Nifty was actually underperforming till the month of September itself. So this is something which has happened already in the US. The Dow Jones US Bank Index has not even surpassed the 2008 high, even though the S&P 500 is at a much higher level. And this doesn't mean that the bank index didn't rise. It just means that it's risen much more slowly, or rather, you can put it in a different way. The decline from the 2008 highs was so severe that even if it's gone up more in percentage terms, it's still not gone back above the 2008 highs. So that's something to really understand. And the same has happened, and it's far more severe in Europe. So in Europe, the underperformance may be even more significant because you actually have a decline. Whereas when you look at the Dow Jones Bank Index, you actually see it going up from the lows of 2009. In case of the European Bank Index, you actually see it going down relative to the market itself. So this is what has happened because of all the extended credit that these markets have deployed. And will we end up doing the same? We did it to some degree. The good news is that we've actually bailed out some of them. For example, the RBI is giving significant credit lines to the NBFCs. The PSUs in the current budget have been allowed to pass on their NPAs to ARCs and reconstruct the whole balance sheet. So these are good things which have happened. And why are we even discussing this? So this will start now. Right now, you'll wonder, am I really giving you an economic and a fundamental talk? And the idea is just to get perspective, because when we talk of Elliott wave analysis, for those who are aware of it and those who are not, you are essentially combining human behavior and psychology into a market model. So it's not just the pattern, because what Elliott wave analysis is, essentially it's a pattern of the markets, right, which you see repeatedly over and over again, which means that we expect that if the larger trend of the market is up, it will move up in 5 waves. Wave 1, it will drop in wave 2, it will go up in wave 3, it will drop in wave 4, it will go up in wave 5. So this 5-wave advance makes up for most of the directional moves, which means if the larger trend is up, it will always move up in 5 waves and then fall in 3 waves, which we end up calling A, B, and C. And what happens after that? The same pattern repeats. Now, why does this repetitive pattern happen? This repetitive pattern happens because Elliott wave analysis is doing nothing but studying mass psychology. When we say that we are studying mass psychology, what we are really saying is that we are studying emotions of the crowd put together. So this analysis works best when you take a large good index or you take a stock which is widely held, because then you have participation by a large number of investors or traders, and their behavior would show this pattern, because this is a pattern of the masses. It's not a pattern of an individual. Okay, so when a large crowd comes together and they are exposed to the same phenomena or the same external stimuli, and in the case of markets, what would be the external phenomena in terms of stimuli? It would be the economic growth, it would be the government measures, it would be the public perception of growth, it would be inflation, interest rates, all the factors that we look at, and the public's perception and reaction to those events results in this fractal coming up again and again and again. And that is why, because it's a reaction to the underlying fundamentals, that the pattern actually reflects the underlying fundamentals. So at each stage of these movements, there are certain type of fundamental factors that we actually see. Okay, and that's where this whole subject of finance and banking becomes important to really understand. So in the early stages, everything is picking up, which is usually a larger wave 1 and wave 2. And at that stage, nobody's really clear as to whether you're going to get growth back. You're just springing back from a crash. So there's a crash, the market moves up in its first impulse, hoping that there's growth coming back, and then, well, when people are still confused, it dips, fear comes back in, and you really wonder whether growth is coming back or not. But this is where the value buying really happens. Eventually, growth does come back to some degree. People recognize that growth is coming, and that results in what we call the third wave. Okay, and once you have had a meaningful third wave of growth, at the end you get the unexpected correction. I mean, despite growth was happening, probably valuations went up too much, market got overheated, the central bank said too much overheating, let's raise interest rates slightly and slow this down, otherwise we'll end up in too much inflation.